Hello, it's Rafael Gutierrez, and today I'm going to talk a lot about the cranial nerves and the special senses. First one I'm going to talk about is obviously going to be cranial nerve 1, and you can see it here. And so you see the olfactory bulb, the olfactory tract, and it is going to split down the middle. I'm going to pause here and I'm going to show you how the olfactory nerve works. So cranial nerve 1 is olfactory. Now there are some structures from respiratory you want to know for the olfactory nerve. First, you remember the nose, you have the nares, and you have the 3 lumps inside the nasal cavity called the nasal concha. And so air comes in and it causes turbulence. Now you also remember that you have the ethmoid bone here and an area called the cribriform plate, which has holes going down the sides here. And the olfactory bulb sits up here, and the olfactory neurons come over here and branch going in here. Now, one of the neat things is the olfactory nerves are actually naked neurons. They don't really have anything protecting them, so whatever sticks to them causes them to fire and sends a message from the olfactory bulb to olfactory tract and goes to the olfactory centers of the brain. So that's cranial nerve 1. Going back to the brain, you can see another nerve here and here. There's the optic nerve, which goes to the optic tract, which goes to the optic radiations. Now, one of the things you'll notice is there's something missing here. Right up here, you have the pituitary. And these nerves cross in an area called the optic chiasm. And to really understand the optic nerve, which is cranial nerve 2, you have to understand how vision works. And so I'm going to actually draw the eyes, how vision works. And so I'm going to actually draw the eyes. So when we look at the eyes, there are a lot of structures that you want to pay attention to. What we have is we have the eye. Now, right in front of the eye here, you have a clear area, which is called the cornea. Behind this cornea, you have the colored area of your eye here, which is called your iris. Now remember, your iris is a circle, and it does have smooth muscle, but now we have the iris here, and the hole here is called your pupil. Now, behind the iris, we have specialized muscles here, which are holding the lens. Now, these muscles that are holding the lens here can actually pull it so the lens can accommodate to focus a little better. And the area here is called your ciliary bodies. So we have the sclera, the choroid, and then under that we have, I'm trying to make it red, and it's called the retina. And the retina is where you have your blood vessels. Now you notice that I'm left a little place back here blank. The reason is, back there, the optic nerve comes in here. And the optic nerve has a bunch of neurons which are actually facing backwards. So the receptors for the neurons are back here. You also have the blood vessels. The artery comes in through here, and the vein goes in through there too. And so we now have the basic structures of the eye. There's an area in the eye which is important for everyone to know, and that's this here. If you notice, there is no neurons facing that area. It's called the optic disc, and you pretty much have an area where there's no sight present. It's a blind spot. To make up for that, there is a divot here where it has a lot more neurons than anything else. You have more rods, and that's called your fovea. One of the neat things about the eye is it is built backwards. What I mean is all the receptors are actually facing this way. So if you were thinking of a camera here, the camera would be facing the back of the eye. What ends up happening is, let's say you want to see your friend. The light hits your friend and it goes into your eye, and when it hits the lens, it crosses over. So at this point, your friend is upside down, the image, and it would go back, hit the back of the eye, reflect back, and hit the receptors. Now the receptors are kind of neat. They're actually inhibitory neurons, so you turn them off when they're activated, and that ends up sending the message to the neural tract, which goes to the occipital lobe. So we have one eye here and one eye on the other side. We have 3 areas we can see. This eye here would end up seeing this area here and this area here. This other eye will end up seeing this area here and the area here. And so what you have is you have an area of overlap, and that's where you have binocular vision and you have depth perception. If you're missing one eye, or if you're seeing things on the areas where the other eye doesn't see it, you actually don't have the depth perception. As this comes over to the other side, the blue would be, the gray would be seen here, and the green would be seen over here. The gray would be here, the blue would be here. And what's fun is when this goes over, the blue area here, which is seen here, and the green, which is seen here, crosses over to the other side where the optic chiasm is. And that's where you have the pituitary, and sometimes it could press down, getting you to lose these 2 areas. So you end up with this, something called tunnel vision. So we've actually covered cranial nerve 1 and 2. I'm going to actually talk about 3 of them together, and the reason has to do with how these nerves work together. Now the first one is this one here, which I'm making in green. These 2 here are going to be cranial nerve 3, which is called your ocular motor nerve. Cranial nerve 4 will be this one. Now that we have the first 3 cranial nerves, I do want to talk about the 4th and the 6th. I'm going to skip the 5th, but I'm going to show you where it's at. Now the 4th one, 1, 2, 3, 4, is this one here. Little sliver of a nerve coming up here. And that one is called your Abducens Nerve. Cranial Nerve 5. I'm going to color it green so you can see it. And it's this one here. And it's called your Trigeminal Nerve. So what I do want to talk about is your Abducens Nerve. Your Abducens Nerve is going to be, Abducens Nerve is here. So far, Cranial Nerve 1 and 2 come off the cerebrum. Cranial Nerve 3 is coming off the midbrain. Cranial Nerve 4 is also coming off the midbrain, just a little farther side here. And Cranial Nerve 5 is coming off the pons. And the Abducens Nerve is also coming off the pons, which is this one here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to skip 5 for a little bit, and I'm going to draw 2 circles for the eyes. I want you to think of a formula. And the reason is this. You have SO, number 4, LR, number 6, the rest, 3. So we have 2 eyes. If we're looking at the eye socket here, there's a couple muscles that you want to know. The first one is going to insert in the eye up here, and it's going to go straight to the back of the eye socket. And this one has a name, superior rectus. Superior for top, rectus for straight. You also have one down here. This is your superior rectus, and the one down here is your inferior rectus. Then you have one on this side here, which on this side would be here too. Now these two are both on the lateral side, so they're your lateral rectus, and the one here. And all these are going to go to the back of the eye. And here are going to be your medial rectus. Another muscle you have is one that's coming from the medial side here, and it actually comes from here, goes under here, and inserts over here. So when this muscle pulls, it causes a rotation of the eye to help you look down, and it pulls at an angle, causing the eye to rotate in this way. Inferior oblique, which causes a rotation this way. And I told you to remember SO4 and LR6, and then rest 3. SO4 is for superior oblique, cranial nerve number 4, which is the Abducens nerve. SO4 is the oblique, innervated by cranial nerve superior oblique, cranial nerve 4, LR6, lateral rectus, number 6, and every other muscle of the eye is going to be cranial nerve 3. So going back to here, big boy here, a little bit later. Now this is called the trigeminal nerve. And one of the things that if you take your hand and you do the Vulcan salute like this, if you were to put the trigeminal nerve on your face like this, you actually can see where the 3 branches of the trigeminal nerve, the 3 main branches would be. So it's 1, 2, 3. So it's 1, 2, 3. Those are actually the trigeminal nerves. And trigeminal has 2 big functions. One is it's one of the nerves that controls the muscles of mastication, and it also gives you facial sensation. Now, to really talk about facial sensation, I do need to talk about the skin. Skin has different layers to it. You have the bottommost layer, which would be made up of these big circles with nuclei pressed on the side, which this would be adipose tissue. This is the lower level of skin called the hypodermis. Above that, you have dense, irregular connective tissue going everywhere. Remember, it's dense, irregular. And this is called your dermis. And it ends up having these little, which come up like this. And you have above that, this area here, your epidermis. Epi meaning outer, dermis skin. Things to remember is we're going to be dealing with pain, pressure, and vibration. And these are going to be in a lot of different areas. And one of the first things I want you to know is the epidermis. You have the dermal papillae, like I said, coming here. And this is your epidermis. And the bottom layer, you have these kind of globular cells. Now, this is a basement membrane. These globular cells make up your stratum basale. Now, one of the cells that you do have in the stratum basalis starts here and has projections that kind of run up. And that is called your melanocyte. Melano for melanin, site for cell. And it's on the basal lamina pretty much, right on the basement membrane. Another cell you have there is a Merkel cell. And Merkel cells send these chemical messages anytime these cells are compressed. After the stratum basalum, you have, these by the way are called the dermal ridges too, or dermal papillae. After the stratum basalis, you have another type of groups of cells on top. And these are kind of spiny type cells. And this area is called the Stratum Spinosum. Kind of spiny little cells. And then on top of that, you have a area which is called the Stratum Granulosa. And the cells here are actually made up of keratinocytes, the cells that are making keratin. And they tend to be a little more grainy. They have keratin fibers that are there. And the cell membrane is thickening and the organelles are starting to break apart. Then you have a clear layer. And the clear layer is called the stratum lucidum. And on top of it, you have layers of keratin, which is a specialized protein, and that's called your stratum corneum, the hard layer. And so the lucidum is down here. One of the things is glassy appearance, and it's usually just found in thick skin. Now, you do have other types of modifications that can happen to this, and that's actually, we have to look at the other cells. We have the Merkel cells, which are going to detect pressure, and we have free nerve endings on the dermis. This would be the dermal layer, and these free nerve endings usually revolve around pain. We also have 2 specialized structures. One of the specialized structures is on the dermis, and it's these little coil-like things here called the Meissner's plexus. Now, Meissner's plexus do determine feel pressure, and then you have another area really deep which is called your Pacinian corpuscle. And Pacinian does determine vibration. So you have pressure and vibration and pain from free nerve endings here. And so your trigeminal nerve is one of the nerves involved in the sensation in skin. And there's a couple other things that I would want to mention in skin. One is in the area where you have adipose tissue, down here, between the dermis and hypodermis, you have your blood supply, blood vessels coming across here. And you do have upshoots here, which have capillaries underneath, just as you touch the layer of cells in the epidermis. That means as the cells get away from here, they start dying because they don't have the blood supply. The other things you do have, besides the blood vessels, is you do have a lot of specialized structures in skin. One of the important things is the blood vessel here will usually have a little bud coming in here, and it will go to the root of a hair follicle. You have cells coming up here, and this hair follicle will make contact with the epidermis. You do have specialized muscle here. So here, it's called your Erector Pili muscle. So you have your Erector Pili muscle up here. You have your hair follicle coming over here. You have the bed over here, which is going to make the proteins, which end up making the hair. And you also have this area here, which is filled of glands. These are sebaceous glands. They pretty much produce oil. You also have another pore, which is coming up all the way through the skin, and it's attached to another tube here. It can end up secreting water out. So it's a sweat gland. So far we have Cranial Nerve 1, olfactory, Cranial Nerve 2, which is the optic, Cranial Nerve 3, ocular motor, Cranial Nerve 4, which is your trochlear, your Cranial Nerve 5, which is trigeminal, which we talked about, Cranial Nerve 6, which is abducens, and the next one we have is called the facial nerve, which is here, which would be your 7th cranial nerve, which is facial. It's also involved in moving muscles of the face, but these are muscles of facial expression, which you should go back to your muscles and understand which are the muscles of facial expression, but it also is involved in some sensation. For instance, the facial nerve actually gives you some sensation of the face. It also can give you sensation of the anterior two-thirds sensation of the tongue. So if you look at your tongue, 2/3 of it is from the facial nerve. And there is a lot to the tongue that you would want to look at. For instance, if you're with me, you're going to want to look at the tongue and look at the taste buds and all the different structures in there. There is a little nerve that comes off here. It's going to go to the ears, and it's called the vestibular cochlear nerve. And to really understand it again, we have to start looking at the ear. Looking at the ear, we have the external ear here. External acoustic meatus is here. This here is part of the temporal bone, and you have the auricle here, which is the earpiece. There's a lot of little parts here we'll go into, but you have the external acoustic meatus, and over here you have the tympanic membrane. Now, the tympanic membrane is pretty much your eardrum, and if you look closely, you can see 3 little bones. You can see the 3 little bones here. This bone here is a malleus. It's attached to bone here, which is a stapes, the incus. Then you have the stapes. Now, one thing you will also notice is you have a muscle here, which is called the Tensor Tympani. You also can see a tube going from the middle ear. This area here, this cavity is the middle ear, and there's a tube going to the mouth. That is either your eustachian tube or your tympano-auditory tube. Now, you can see a certain area here, which is part of the inner ear. As we come here, we can see the bones of the ears a lot better. Malleus, the incus, you can see it here. And you can see the stapes is just that little area right where the pointer is right now. And you can see the inner ear, which is this area here, which is called the vestibular cochlear apparatus. One thing you'll notice is you have this snail shell shaped thing here, which is called the cochlea, and you have these canals here, which are called the semicircular canals, and they're in your vestibular apparatus. These things do work in a little different. The cochlea tends to get vibrations from the external ear going to your middle ear. The vibrations end up being sent through what's known as the vibrations go into the oval window, go through the Cochlear Duct, and leave through the round window. And the eustachian tube helps equilibrate the pressure. The vestibular apparatus, this here, has these 3 canals, which are called the semicircular canals, and they are going to help determine angular acceleration. If we're looking at the semicircular canals and we cut that snail shell, what we would see is we'd see a bunch of these 3 shaped tubes. And this is actually, each one of these is inside something called the bony cochlear wall. Now you have the vestibular duct up here. Down here, you have your tympanic duct. And this little area here is called your cochlear duct. Now your cochlear duct is actually really important because it has something really special. If we were to take this here and blow it up, for instance, see a membrane here, which is called the vestibular membrane, which would end up giving us that big vestibular. We then would have the cochlear duct here. And in the cochlear duct, we have a little membrane coming here, which is called the pectoral membrane, and you have a series of cells here. If we were to look at this even closer, what we would end up seeing is we'd see a basement membrane, the pectoral membrane, and in here we'd see little hair cells with cilia here. They're called stereocilia. And those are the ones that actually end up determining sound. And they're attached to the cochlear nerve, and that cochlear nerve ends up coming together to vestibular cochlear nerve. The vestibular is attached to the semicircular canals and an area called the vestibular apparatus. And all that would end up going to a nerve, which is going to be going back to our brain, to our vestibular cochlear nerve. And that will end up going to temporal lobe. Next to the 8th cranial nerve, or the vestibular cochlear nerve, we have another nerve you can see here. This nerve that comes off right there is called the glossopharyngeal nerve. And the glossopharyngeal nerve will end up going to 1/3 posterior aspect of the tongue to give you sensation of taste. It's also used for the muscles of swallowing. That's your cranial nerve 9. Should have another nerve coming off here, which would be the 10th cranial nerve, which is called your vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve, it goes everywhere, and it's the main nerve for parasympathetics. Besides that, it's also used for the gag reflex and to make certain sounds. As we continue looking at this, we do have another nerve which actually comes here and forms this big projection here which comes off over here. This one here is your accessory nerve. And your accessory nerve is really important because what it's going to do is it's going to go, and it's on both sides, it's going to help you shrug your shoulders. It does help move the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. And the last one, and this one again didn't show up too well in this picture, and this nerve here is your hypoglossal nerve. Tells you hypo, below, glossal, tongue. It's really a nerve that helps you move your tongue around. And those are the 12 cranial nerves that are involved in special senses. This should be enough for you to be able to start your study of anatomy. And I hope you enjoyed this and you found some benefit. I do go a little deeper in a lot of the stuff in my lab manual, and it's always being updated. So hopefully if you enjoy this video, you will enjoy the lab manual. Thank you and have a good day.